howdy howdy. Nowadays, when many people read, it's mostly captions, websites, and social media. But people don't necessarily read a lot of books anymore. They might listen to some, but reading, not so much. Though I still find it fascinating to see which books have been banned, censored, or challenged by states and lobbying groups, or sometimes even entire federal governments. What made people demand that these books be removed from shelves? In the first half of 2023 alone, there were 531 attempts to censor books in the USA. You know, it kind of reminds me of the restricted section in Harry Potter. The more they tell me, you can't see this, the more I want to. Anyway, let's check out the 10 books that have been banned throughout history. I've tried to focus more on the modern banned books, but I've thrown in a few older banned books for some perspective. And obviously, there will be some discussion of some very sensitive, difficult subjects. But whatever the reasons these books have been challenged or banned, I'll try my best to give you a respectful, thoughtful look as to why. With that preamble aside, let's begin. Number 10. Captain Underpants. Behold, the most frequently banned children's book in America. It's astonishing how often this silly 12-book series gets banned in schools. But as the book writer himself, Dave Pikey, points out,
no profanity, no sex, no nudity, no drugs, no smoking, no alcohol, no guns, and no more violence than a children's superhero cartoon.
In fact, this story is about as cheesy and silly as it gets. Two 4th grade boys named George and Harold brainwash their principal, Mr. Krupp. They make him believe he's the superhero Captain Underpants, and that's really all there is to it. The books don't instruct children on how to Nazi salute, they don't give a step-by-step guide on building a bomb. It's just a bunch of silly stories about these kids and their principal Captain Underpants. Despite this, throughout the years, all the books in the series have been faced with bans. So what got this to be number 2 in the American Library Association's top 100 most banned books? Schools and lobbying groups particularly didn't like the main characters. They said George and Harold were disrespectful to authority, and there was inappropriate humor. Censorship attempts got even worse in the 12th book, because it was revealed that one of our main characters, Harold, is gay, because in the far future, he marries another guy. Why is that a problem? Please don't tell me it's because of these lobbying groups' religion. Well, maybe they should try the Hello Kitty religion.
Yeah!
Alright, let's take SpongeBob as an example for a second, as the show primarily aims at the same demographic as Captain Underpants. I could say SpongeBob is also disruptive to authority for crashing various vehicles, causing property damage, and disrupting Miss Puff's teaching at boating school. Or Plankton is disruptive for trying to steal from Mr. Krabs' legitimate business practice. But if someone really does think SpongeBob is a bad influence on their kids, well, they can ban it in their home. And frankly, in 2024, parents or organizations should be thankful that their kids put down their tablets and phones to open a book at all. Captain Underpants has gotten so many kids reading, and we shouldn't stand in the way of that. To quote the author Dave again, we can make a simple change to better the world, rather than saying,
I don't want children to read this book.
We could instead say,
I don't want my children to read this book.
That way we can still show our concerns, but also preserve the freedom for every person to choose what they learn and think for themselves. Number 9. And Tango Makes 3. This is a children's book from 2005. It talks about 2 penguins from the zoo, but these 2 male penguins were a little bit different. Roy and Silo did everything together. It's a beautiful story about these 2 penguins starting a family, and it's never explicit or lewd. In fact, it's based on 2 real-life penguins at the Central Park Zoo. But Roy and Silo soon realize they can't do what a lot of other penguin couples can do and fertilize eggs. They want a family too, so the zookeeper gives them an orphaned egg, and they care for and adopt the egg. That's it. Isn't that nice? Sadly, LGBTQIA media was less accepted when this book was published in 2005, and the book is still challenged and banned today, so we're still having problems with it.
Pan America has counted 84 titles no longer available to kids in the Florida district.
The ALA reports that Tango Makes 3 was the most contested book from 2006 to 2010. As there's zero actual violence, sensual content, or graphic depictions of anything, the majority of bans seem to have happened because these two penguins are male and they're starting a family. But again, it's based on real penguins at the zoo. And various scientific studies, such as from the Imperial College of London, have found that animal homosexuality is common in over 1,000 species of the animal kingdom. One of them, of course, being penguins. Bisexuality in animals was even more common. Many researchers are fascinated about how this all fits into evolution. But you know what? I'll make this even easier for people who still want to ban the book. They don't even have to read a single dry scientific article, because they can see Tango Makes 3 in real life at my local aquarium in Australia. Meet Sven and Magic.
Hi, I'm Tish from Sea Life Sydney Aquarium, and I'm happy to announce that our strongest power couple, Sven and Magic, are still together for the second year in a row.
Like Roy and Silo, they live in a zoo or an aquarium. According to Sea Life Sydney's zookeepers,
Sven and Magic continue to have the biggest and most neatly stacked nest in the exhibit.
you go guys, and congratulations on hatching a Svengic. Oh, it's a terrible name. Ugh. When I asked Sven and Magic directly how they'd been going raising Svengic, they said... Then I realized, you know, they're penguins. And what's the 8th ban book? 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. 50 Shades, ooh, for when your inner goddess is about to explode.
Oh, I read these. These books are funny.
They're a naughty book. In fact, they're among your favorites if I remember right. It's also number 8 in the top 100 most banned books. What do you think? Do they have much worth banning?
No way. They aren't even raunchy. I'd barely give them an M.
I feel more like Anastasia and Christian's lack of chemistry should be banned. Well, let's investigate. Some people know 50 Shades as a comedy, but I suspect it was intended to be an aero romance novel. The book is primarily being banned and challenged in the United States, supposedly because it's sensually explicit and quote-unquote religious viewpoints.
I never remember them bringing up religion in the books.
And we watched the movies like 4 times, and I don't remember any religion being in there either. But you know, even in early drafts, the book was plagued by controversy. You see, originally, 50 Shades was an internet Twilight fanfiction series titled Master of the Universe. I'm not kidding. The author, Erica James, aka Snow Queen Ice Dragon, posted her fanfiction on various websites. And from now on, I'm going to call her Snow Queen Ice Dragon because that is the best title ever. Originally, 50 Shades characters were named Edward and Bella, but Snow Queen Ice Dragon was immediately hit by comments concerned about the sensual nature of her fanfiction. Struck back by controversy, Snow Queen Ice Dragon removed her Twilight fanfiction from websites. Oh, could this story get any better? But not one to give up. Snow Queen Ice Dragon instead posted her stories on her own website, 50shades.com, which I was delighted to find is still active, and it's just adorable. Before trying to publish her story, because why not, she instead changed the names from Edward and Bella to Anastasia Steele and Christian Grey. It all makes sense now. How does no one ever talk about this origin story? This is even funnier than the books themselves. When reached for comment, Stephanie Meyer, the author of Twilight, said,
It's not really my genre. Not my thing. But good on her. She's doing well. That's great.
And good on her for being such a good sport about it.
Raunchy part, I wish that wasn't attached to Twilight, just because I don't like to think of it that way, but you know, it doesn't hurt Twilight.
An author I wanted to talk about but couldn't, Salman Rushdie, also commented on the book. He said,
I've never read anything so badly written that got published in my entire life.
So why all the controversy? Despite 50 Shades selling over 150 million copies, it's been criticized due to its depictions of BD bedroom stuff. Some experts on that particular topic say it shows incorrect and possibly dangerous techniques. And that makes sense because coinciding with 50 Shades release, injuries related to BD stuff and toy use spiked dramatically. In fact, hospital visits increased by over 50%. Consistently from 2010 to 2019, 50 Shades was among the 8 most banned books in the USA. Hey Nin, do they have any other reasons listed?
Because it's sensually explicit, contains nudity, offensive language, and honey, I still don't get the religious viewpoints thing.
Yeah, I looked, but I couldn't find any reasoning for that one either. Florida went on to remove copies of 50 Shades from their library shelves, with claims it didn't meet their selection criteria and reviews of the book had been poor. They're trying to ban a book for being badly written? Really? But due to hugely popular demand, eventually Florida had to make their copies available. Now don't get me wrong, there's absolutely major problems with the relationship with Christian and Anastasia. Christian descends into stalker behavior and being overly controlling many times. But it literally started as an internet Twilight fanfiction by Snow Queen Ice Dragon. What could we expect? So if you're not hurting anyone and you enjoy it, you go right ahead. And no offense meant against E.L. James or Snow Queen Ice Dragon. I know what it's like to put your work out there, and it really struck a chord with people and made a lot of people happy, and that's great. And 7, lucky 7. Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. According to PEN America, this was the #1 most frequently banned book in the 2023 school year, with over 33 bans. That's impressive, so why all the kerfuffle? Well, the summary of the book itself reveals a lot. 5 troubled teenagers fall into prostitution as they search for freedom, safety, community, and love. Tricks is known for its gritty realism, but an interesting twist is the book is written in verse, similar to poetry, but this certainly doesn't take away from the intensity of the writing. All 5 of our teen main characters are deeply troubled, with some downright rotten parents. Eden's story is a good example. She's sent off to Christian rehabilitation camp because her heavily Christian father has decided she's being controlled by quote-unquote demonic influences. Why does he think she's under demonic influences? Why, because she's dating a non-Christian guy. Seriously, dude, why not try the Hello Kitty religion? No torturing your daughter required. I mean, I'm not a member, but these two are.
Yeah.
Anyway, Eden's eventually able to escape the camp through sensual favors and eventually runs away to Vegas. Unsure of how to survive, she's forced into prostitution, though eventually she is able to escape. This may sound horrifying, but when I looked at Goodreads, many people love this book. I like the way Nancy described the book in her review.
Tricks broke my heart and made my stomach churn. These stories were gripping, painful and honest. My own teenage years, painful memories and wrong choices all came flooding back.
It's a book about managing tough choices and bitter loneliness, but also glimmers of hope and accepting who you are. And that, to me, is real artistic value. Even if I don't think it was for everyone, I certainly don't think Tricks should have been banned as much as it was. And for number 6, Ulysses. Over a century old, this is among the original banned books. In fact, it was immediately banned upon its original publication. Back in 1921, the author, Joyce, found himself in an obscenity trial in the USA. Because of this book, he was found guilty under the laws of 1873, and the book series was forcibly halted and immediately banned. The publisher was even fined £100. Scandalous. So what caused all this fuss in the 1920s? Well, Ulysses had some sensual passages, and there was a particular self-gratification scene that was the main reason for the ban. After the USA banned Ulysses, the UK also went on to ban the book. Copies were seized and burned by both the US Postal Service and the British ports. Apparently in the 1920s, the US Postal Service also had the job of burning books. Jeebus. Despite this, the book was still a huge hit on the black market. I could just see someone going up and being like, "Hey man, you got the goods? It's Ulysses. Oh, the real deal? Yeah, but just keep it to yourself. Oh man, I am gonna do so much reading tonight." Of course, nowadays the book has been circulated widely, so, you know, in the 1920s we could figure out the Spanish flu vaccine, but we couldn't allow adults to read about something that almost every adult does. Number 5. Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe. This had 41 bans in the 2021 to 2022 school year alone, and 15 bans as recent as 2023. Ever since its publication in 2019, Genderqueer has remained among the most banned books in the United States. This book has even been removed in some libraries in my country as well. And yes, Florida also banned the book in libraries from every district. Surprising no one at this point? We're in for a treat though, as these memoirs are a graphic novel. They walk the reader through the author's struggles with gender dysphoria and being accepted into society as an asexual. Supporters of this book say it can help confused teens identify by providing a language for the trans and non-binary community. And I believe that's a very educated response, and I agree. But some people don't like that it also has some illustrations you might find in a sex education book, and one single questionable ancient illustration of 3,000-year-old pottery art that I'll get to later. Some people believe that because of a couple of these pictures in Genderqueer, this apparently makes Genderqueer a quote-unquote pornographic book.
There's no doubt this book includes graphic imagery of a pornographic nature.
In fact, I read reviews that are so deeply against this book that they claimed it had pages depicting criminal behavior. That is some very serious claims for people to be making, so I read through the entire book myself to be safe. Get comfy and I'll tell you what I found. Just a note, I'll be using Spivak pronouns for Maya in our book, as this is what I like. Maya put pronouns in a way that really connected with me on page 208.
For me, being called she was like discovering a rock stuck in my shoe, or getting scratched by the tag at the back of my shirt. A small spike of solvable discomfort.
That sounds like a real annoyance. So personally, I'm going to try and make that little bit of effort to try and help that person's discomfort. The story starts in childhood. We get a very quick picture that Maya always has struggled with gender dysphoria, even when she was very young. We get a lot of good examples of this, such as when they go into the water with their shirt off as a child, and the young boys mock him for this, or when they want their hair more boyish. We get one of our more graphic pages when Maya has their time of a month, which for the sake of YouTube flagging videos I will blur, but I personally don't think this is something that would be too much for teenagers. It could be very relatable to some women, many of who have to deal with this regularly. Eventually I got to what I suspect is the most controversial page in the book, which apparently shows naked art of Plato's Symposium, artwork found on ancient pottery cups nearly 3,000 years ago, as shown here in the Met Museum. Honestly, this one picture just confused me, as fully visible privates aren't drawn in any other part of the book. Personally, I still feel this book would have been just as powerful even if this tiny piece of art had been removed. But I also don't think this single piece of artwork on one page of a 237-page book about self-discovery makes it a book worth banning completely. And I personally don't think one picture makes it a pornography book. Page 168 also depicts partial course, but 99% of the book shows way less than your average education book for teens, or American Pie.
Really?
There's another slightly graphic part with no actual private shown, which is Maya's experience getting a pap smear. It has a cartoon sword and some blood through the stomach, and it paints the picture well for me. Sophie from Geek Mum commented on this part in her review.
Maya's first experience going for a pap smear was especially harrowing and resonated with me more than I expected.
Overall, if I'd read this as a teen, you know what I would have done? I probably would have put it down because I don't relate to it, because it wasn't written for me. So aside from that one pottery art piece, I personally think all other 237 pages are fine. And when interviewed, I think the non-binary author, Maya Kobabe, stated her reasons for writing it very well.
Having a book like this, or any book that explored non-binary identity, would have probably taken 10 years of confusion and uncertainty out of my life.
Yeah, number 4. Looking for Alaska by John Green. You know, the original host of Crash Course.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World.
Does a crap ton of amazing charity work for areas like Sierra Leone. John and his brother are inspirations, but they've done so much it just makes my head spin. But apparently John still wasn't doing enough, so he became a best-selling author. And in 2015, his first book became the most challenged book of the year. Looking for Alaska was banned in various schools and libraries of the USA, supposedly for offensive language and being sensually explicit. When the book was banned in his hometown, John was absolutely heartbroken. So what caused so many schools, libraries, and lobbying groups to lose their marbles this time? Well, why don't we let John explain the main page that caused the fuss.
The scene in question involves a very awkward and ultimately failed attempt at oral sex, which is described in very cold and clinical language. In fact, the entire passage contains only one adjective: nervous.
Alaska and Miles are very dispassionately attempting and failing to do that, but the ironic part is this scene is followed by a more intimate scene where neither character does any scooterly pooping, and yet it ends with Miles simply whispering "I love you" to Alaska as she sleeps. Sadly, another target of the ban was LGBTQIA content.
It's him, isn't it? The guy you were in love with?
That was him.
A nerdfighter on Reddit reflected with their experience with the book, and it really spoke to me.
It's an amazing book on what it's like growing up LGBT. It teaches a lot about modern LGBT conflicts and ideas starting to come to the forefront, like asexuality and genderqueer.
And another nerdfighter's response felt depressingly accurate.
That's why it's banned.
And you know, I think John poses a good point when he talked about the novel being banned.
I don't believe that books, even bad books, corrupt us. Instead, I believe books challenge and interrogate. They give us windows into the lives of others and give us mirrors so that we can better see ourselves.
And for our third banned book, Catcher in the Rye. You know, side note, I really love this book cover. Don't these colors just jump out at you? The Catcher in the Rye has consistently been listed as one of the best novels of the 20th century. But its censorship goes all the way back to the 1960s. From 1961 to 1982, Catcher was the most censored book in the United States. Take the school it was banned from in 1978, where, get this, 3 school board members said, "This book is part of an overall communist plot." These board members were later fired. Hopefully they didn't fall to communism. Ooh, careful or they might start petitioning for free healthcare. Even in the 90s and 2000s, Catcher in the Rye was still somehow among the most frequently challenged books, though it was a popular enough book that it also popularized the term screw up. So why all the fuss for half a century? How bad can it really be? I remember the South Park boys are pretty underwhelmed. Well, back in the olden days, people took issue with the main character, Holden Caulfield. Our buddy Holden is a rough customer that uses some vulgar language. Another big concern for people was blasphemy, really? If it's in America, I'm guessing blasphemy against the Christian religion. And get this reason they listed: the undermining of family values and the encouragement of rebellion. Oh, I want to meet the tightwads that said all this stuff. They probably said this because at one point Holden runs away from school and then plans to run away from home. But the problem with their plan is censorship of the book has often had the effect of making it more popular. And it's almost a cliche nowadays to study it in high school. I've heard so many people on internet forums complaining about having to study this book. Part of the controversy might also come from the fact that this book was in the center of a very tragic event: the murder of Beatles member John Lennon. The murderer said he was inspired by Catcher in the Rye for some reason. He even waited at the scene of the crime reading Catcher in the Rye until he was arrested. He was given life imprisonment. Now, I'm certainly no expert, but this does remind me of when people say violent video games cause violence. I personally think Catcher in the Rye is a book that has taught so much to schools and colleges throughout history. I think Catcher in the Rye has given a different perspective to many teens of a very troubled teen. But every now and then, an unstable person is going to break our hearts and cause a tragic event. And they may well have been reading Catcher in the Rye, or in modern times, playing Call of Duty. It doesn't necessarily mean that most people are going to become more violent because of violent video games, but violent, unstable people may be attracted to these games. In the end, I looked at how my community was affected by this book. On my Twitter, readers like Big Blue Dog said,
"This is one of my favourite books ever. At face value, it's a teenager drinking and getting into a bad situation in New York. Under the surface, it's all about coming to terms with growing up.
And an old friend of mine certainly didn't seem traumatized by it at all, but rather she was deeply comforted by it.
Holy shit, I love that book. Ever since I read it as a depressed high school student, I've felt that it's a book that every teenager should try to read at least once, because it really fucking gets teenagers.
Now let's move on to what I consider the two most controversial books, banned not just by lobbying groups, but some federal governments and countries. Number 2. Mein Kampf. This translates in German to My Struggle. Ugh, you may have heard of this one. It was written in 1925 by Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party and the genocidal maniac responsible for some of the worst mass murders in world history. And this book maps out his ideology for these atrocities. So obviously, big disclaimer. I'm talking about an evil book filled with groundless racist garbage written in the ramblings of a long-dead psychotic madman. So, you know, just a heads up. If that's not your thing, I understand. The book itself is an autobiography. Hitler discusses his life and the process of how he became an anti-Semitic, which is basically hostility against Jewish people. Much of Hitler's crazy ramblings in the book are about how the supposed lesser races should be controlled by the quote-unquote strong races. Ugh. In this case, the German, Nordic, and Anglo-Saxon people. Mostly the Germans. And obviously, most of his angry bile is aimed right at the Jewish people. Honestly, the writing sounds very familiar, as much of his long-winded writing is written with this groundless grandioseness. He's just so proud of himself. But obviously, his ideals have no scientific basis whatsoever beyond his own ego and insanity. But as we've seen, education is not required to rile people up. And as George Orwell said, Hitler's personality had a magnetic allure for many Germans at the time. We must not underestimate the appeal to some people of Hitler's ideas. In this book, Hitler detailed how he felt the current parliamentary system was corrupt and he wanted to destroy it. According to Wikipedia, he blamed Germany's issues at the time on the Democrats and the Jewish people. Now obviously, all throughout the world, this is considered a highly controversial book. But back in 1939, before World War II was even finished, the book had sold 5.2 million copies and been translated to 11 languages. On Hitler's passing, all rights to his estate, including Mein Kampf, were passed to the state of Bavaria, and Bavaria wanted nothing to do with it. In agreement with the German government, they refused to allow copying or printing of the book in Germany, so it was in essence banned. They opposed the printing and copying of the book in other countries, but it was outside of Germany, so there was nothing they could do. But there are a variety of restrictions on the book in other countries too, such as France, where it was unofficially translated as a warning to the French people in 1934. However, Hitler sued the translator, won, and had all the copies in France seized. What kind of judge hears Hitler in a copyright trial? In a place like the Netherlands, Mein Kampf has been banned ever since World War II. But recently in 2018, an academic version of the book was released. And what about the US of A? Mein Kampf is protected under the First Amendment and can be found in many American libraries. In fact, more than 15,000 copies are sold per year. I guess they're more concerned about banning gay penguins raising families in the zoo. Though hopefully a student carrying Mein Kampf around would get at least one visit to the counselor's office. Personally, I'm glad Mein Kampf has continued to be studied academically as a warning to the past, because that con man's grandiose words had an undeniable effect on many people. And as I believe Thomas Jefferson said, the cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. Of course, the Germany we know today is one of the most racially accepting and welcoming countries in the world. And for the #1 banned book, the Anarchist Cookbook. I was hesitant to mention this book, but I want to mention it for both historical and educational purposes. Knowing of it, at least, gives us some historical perspective of the 1970s. And realistically, I am certainly not the first person to talk about it. This book has been used for education in universities for decades. But big disclaimer in advance, obviously I don't recommend the book. In fact, even the author William has tried to have it removed from circulation. And the book wasn't banned by some over-religious lobbying groups. It was banned by countries' federal governments. For example, in the UK, people have been prosecuted under the England Terrorism Act simply for owning the book. And over the years, many people have owned it whom have caused bombings and disasters. But it's worth keeping in mind correlation doesn't equal causation. Up until recently, it was refused classification in my own country, Australia. This basically means it's completely banned. The author, William Powell, wrote this book as a teenager. He wrote it around the end of the peaceful protest times of the 1960s. His goal in writing it was to protest against the USA's involvement in the Vietnam War. So to oversimplify it, it was written by a hippie. So what does this cookbook have? Well, it contains recipes for bombs and weapons. Originally, William wanted his Anarchist Cookbook to provide education to the quote-unquote silent majority of Americans. So the intention was to be used by oppressed citizens in defense against a dictatorship. But in time, William came to have great remorse for writing his book. By 1979, William had traveled to Middle East, Africa, and east parts of Asia. He worked at international schools, educating himself and writing about conflict resolution methods. He no longer believed that violence was an acceptable way to bring about change, and he heavily campaigned to have his own book removed from publication. Despite this, the publisher continued to have it published. Part of why they kept publishing was actually an interesting reason. They wanted to defy efforts from the FBI and the CIA that were trying to obtain lists of people who bought the book. It's a rough story for William because despite his regret of the book, as he got older he had a hard time finding employment. He described the book as
a youthful indiscretion or mistake that can haunt someone for many years.
And yeah, I can see publishing a book on explosives and Molotov cocktails doing that. Many years later, William had these comments.
When I wrote the book, I was angry and alienated. Today, I realize that violence can't be used to prevent violence.
I get where he's coming from, but I personally don't think there's a concrete answer. For example, I personally support Ukrainian citizens choosing to learn to defend themselves against Russian military driving tanks down their streets. But I'd also never want to see this cookbook used to hurt people doing peaceful protests. And I would never want to see the book used for acts of terrorism. So yeah, I think it really depends what the cookbook is used for. And again, I'm not recommending this book, and I don't somehow think more people owning this book is going to make a country safer. But I'm also fortunate enough to live in a country where tanks aren't riding up the streets of my city or bombing supermarkets. Anyway, does this book even have reviews? Oh, you bet it does. In fact, this book has been reviewed by the FBI, the White House, the Department of Justice, and Richard Nixon's lawyer for some reason. The FBI left this memo on the book.
One of the crudest, lowbrow, paranoia writing efforts ever attempted.
I get the impression the FBI did not like it. The FBI also concluded that it doesn't incite forcible resistance to any law in the United States. Therefore, it was protected under the First Amendment. But even to this day, the FBI has kept records on this book. And you know, in 2002, the cookbook had become so well known that they actually made a movie called The Anarchist Cookbook, where this book is brought to a bunch of anarchists and it actually destroys their way of life. However, the movie was panned by critics and a massive box office failure. But you know, personally, I'll be quite happy to never look at Mein Kampf or the Anarchist Cookbook ever again. But you probably realize the ironic part about most of these books. Censorship has a tendency to backfire. Even if we don't like what's in these books, when we censor or ban a book, it's a damn good way to draw a big spotlight around your book that says, hey, read me, your parents don't want you to. And you tell a good academic or scientist they can't read something and they're gonna study the crap out of it. Well, I hope I was good company to you and maybe you got some food for thought. And as always, thanks for watching and hopefully I'll see you next time. I was gonna do a member question, but I haven't thanked my super members in quite some time, so I want to do that now. Obviously, thank you very much to members as well. And you, the viewer, for just giving me the time of day. An extra thank you to Phoenix Healing, JBN Films, Daniel Rigo, Tango, Teddy Street, Langdon Algar, Whatnot and Stuff, Tyler Lublin, Danielle, who I know from my Discord, Guitar Cat, who still has my favorite name, Zany Boy, Smiley Kerr, Zeramalu, and of course Taylor 222222, The Sun Channel, Mewtwo Shadow FNAF Girl, Doll, Nancy E. Finn, Paul's mother-in-law, Dolly Winkles, Death Sail Gaming, Tyree Holmes Games, Deck KP20, exclamation, Irish Sonic Dork 2, Miss Arceus, Super Mario 2199, Jeremy Talbot, Celebration, Extra Virgin Prune Juice, Ruby-chan, who has some lovely artwork, Cameron B and John Bondi. Thank you as always for helping to motivate me. I appreciate you.